All right, a little background and then I'll start to record. If you've got your sheet that looks like this, you can review quickly. We're going to start with the word holy. But remember, these words are arranged in a particular order that can kind of help you think through how God has revealed himself, how certainly the gospel can be presented. We looked first at the word azer, which can have two meanings. Certainly in the original context, the first description of the wife, the completer, the one called alongside. Elsewhere, easy remember, term used to describe God. So whatever has happened in English, and unfortunately the word has been denigrated and lowered to cooking, cleaning, hanging out with the kids, it's a term used biblically, that of a rescuer, a deliverer, a completer of a defense in many scenarios. Imagine your flank is missing, you need to fill in your flank. And God is the one who seems pleased to help elsewhere. I look to the heavens, and from whence shall my help come? All kind of Psalms talk about that word. Very important. We also use it to sort of capture the blissful scene really found in Genesis 1 and 2. Because if you're a reader of the Bible, the good stuff gets away from you real quickly. You got two chapters, this is going great, sort of the end of chapter 2, what could go wrong? And immediately and very ferociously it goes wrong. And we see the dealing with that ruination really takes all the rest of the scriptures all the way through Revelation chapter 20. And only do we return to a biblical normalcy, if you will, or a biblical intended normalcy in Revelation 21 and 22. So you got 2 chapters early, 2 chapters late. In the middle is this ruination of this complete thing that we saw in Genesis 2 by this thing we call sin. Every day that goes on, though, every day that goes by, less and less people will use that word. So we need to be freed up, unlocked a bit, to describe the concept without being enslaved to the word. And that's what a lot of this is all about. This idea of a standard that's not met, in some way veered off, fallen short. Key question, what's the standard being talked about? Biblically, it's not always to go to heaven. Sin can be being late, a fault we've seen, not reaching a certain age, things like that. The word is used to describe the phenomenon when any standard is not met. They would use the concept of chata, or sin. Key for the biblicist is to ask, well, what's the standard being referred to? The yellow sheet will help you think that through a bit. Well, we've got a problem biblically as the revelation goes on. How do we restore that which has now been ruined? God is going to come up with a solution, if you will, as the story unfolds through, the fancy word is instrumentation, through the channel, through the medium of faith, we can be made right with God again. So what's this idea of faith? Hebrew word aman, immediately in my head downloads the concept of strength, okay? Some recognition, perception of strength, and then my dependability upon that thing of strength. That same word was translated doorpost, it was translated artist, it was translated nurse, translated pillar, all kind of different ways to describe this idea of aman, from which we get our word amen. So when you're struggling with faith, go back and resize up the strength of the object that you are struggling with, okay? And biblically, God, over the course of the whole Word of God, presents himself evermore the strong one. And that ridiculous scene we saw where those guys sitting on the 85th floor of the RCA building, they were very familiar with the iron, the metal work of that building. They had laid most of it, and they knew its strength and its ability, weren't worried at all. Like we wouldn't worry about putting a feather on a brick. The feather's not going to do anything to the brick. Why? Because it's strong enough to hold up that weight. Well, through faith, one thing can then be made right. That which was right, was ruined. Through faith, we can restore now to a state of righteousness, which is the big old fancy Bible word for being right or meeting the standard. Hebrew word sadiq, as in Melchizedek, diako or diakosune in the New Testament. All these words are key words because almost all of them are translated, the Old Testament usages are translated in the New Testament. Couldn't imagine a scenario where faith meant something different in the New Testament than it did in the Old, that righteousness didn't mean something different in the Old and New. Sort of the classic verse first found in the Old Testament, Genesis 15, Abram believed God, aman, and it was counted to him as righteousness. He was made right through faith. We call that, our next word, getting saved, this idea of being delivered, almost always from a place of relative danger to a place of safety. The root of the word save is in fact the word in English, S-A-F-E, safe, to be safe. We saw that unusual occurrence in John 11 where people that are asleep, when they wake up, they're becoming saved. They're transferring from a state of sleep to a state of awakeness. So it always means the idea of transference from some status to another. Biblically, most of the time, it's some place of danger to safety, but not always a heaven and hell kind of consequence. In fact, most of the usages in the Bible, including the New Testament, when it uses the word save, refers to deliverance from a physical trauma toward that of physical safety. Even when the disciples are at the Sea of Galilee with the storm, Lord, we are perishing, save us. They weren't looking for, Ephesians 2 right then. They were looking for not to drown, and that's many of the ways the term is used. We look at some of the characteristics of God. What kind of God comes up with this plan that we just saw, that which was right, ruined, now being restored, being transferred back to that original status? A God of grace, undeserved, means nothing, means no strings, absolutely free. We see Satan using the word in Job, the idea of undeservedly or things of that nature. Be careful what you're referring to as grace. When you're demanding it, it's immediately eliminated as being grace. If it's expected and required, it's not grace. If you keep it pure, it makes it all the more lovely to give and all the more lovely to receive. And then, of course, the meddling part of it is go into our aspects of our life in which we think we're either being gracious or receiving grace, and you kind of discover, well, there's a few strings. There's an expectation. Try to clean up those strings, clean out those expectations, and you're really dealing with how God deals with us. He's not looking for us to square the books. We can't do it, and the quicker we realize that, the more in need and in appreciation of grace we find ourselves. So God of glory, kavod in Hebrew, doxa in Greek. Hebrew word kavod, like in Ichabod crane, is the idea of heavy physically, but most of the time it's used to describe that which is important, like in the slang that we saw. That's heavy, that's epic, that's steep, that's deep, that's mega, that's important. The Bible talks that way all the time too. That which is important needs to be dealt with. Can't be blown off. When we blow things off, we assign lightweightness to it. We just think we can blow it away. And that which is heavy needs to be dealt with. So to glorify the Lord is to leave behind a trail in which it appears that your life is in arrangement and in reaction to the importance of God. It looks like you're dealing with that important being in your life, and that trail is left behind. That's what it means to glorify the Lord. A classic example of kind of Christianese that everyone knows, that no one really knows what it means until we just step back and say, it means to treat God as heavy, treat him as important, deal with him, can't blow him off, incorporate his heaviness into your life, that kind of a deal. Lastly, nextly is our word holy. Perhaps the most misunderstood of all the words we're going to study, because, I need to start, Michael. Sorry, buddy. You'd think after, how long have we been shooting? A couple of years now? Holy cow. You'd think after a while I'd get it. Of all the words that we're going to study, probably the word holy might have the most misunderstanding assigned to it. It might be shrouded with the most kind of misunderstood ideas, because almost always we're going to download the concept of sin when it comes to holy. And I want to be holy. I don't want to be involved in sin. I want to be holy. Does the Bible get there? Of course, but it doesn't start there. It takes a while to get there, because guess what? There's a larger meaning. And that concept of holy is going to be seen here as we introduce ourselves to the biblical term holy, found, of course, in both covenants, both testaments. We see in the Old Testament, the root is kadosh, and the New Testament equivalent is hagios. Terms appear all the time, certainly the more famous ones, Isaiah 6, etc., but in some very, very unusual places, probably no more of an eye-opener word that we'll study than the word holy. It's going to convey the idea of that which is set apart, that which is not common, or another word for not common is ordinary. It is distinct. In whatever scenario you're in, if all of us were sitting at tables and one person was sitting off by the side by themselves, they've made themselves distinct. in that phenomenon, in that culture would be, well, that person's considering himself to be distinct or special or holy, if in fact that was their mindset, okay? We deal with so many things that are ordinary and common. Holy things are the things that are different, that are special, we might say. An apartness is involved with the term. Certainly in religious context, sacredness it can be involved, and you'll see that in a lot of high religion and a lot of high, what's called high cult or high approach to God. Consecrated, which has that same kind of an idea. Sorry for the pun, but H-O-L-Y, holy, can best be remembered as being holy, as in the sense of whole, W-H-O-L-E, other. It's completely other. Almost to the point of being alien, by the way. And sometimes in our approach to God, we need a good dose of holiness. Not that he doesn't sin. Okay, I got that. Not that he doesn't want me to sin. I got that. But in his being, in his ontologicalness, he is completely other. He is completely almost alien to us. We're a little bit like him. He's really not like us at all. And I think what happens is we sort of think of Christ and God as just kind of, you know, he's my bud. He's my big brother who's really good. He's the good one in the family. Where he's more close to a Martian than we are to each other. He's almost alien. Back in the day, you still hear songs like this, you know, God of wonders beyond our galaxy, the idea that Third Day wrote there. So for you artists, you conceptual thinkers, to incorporate this idea of holiness, seeing God as so different and distinct. And really the history of the church has been, or one of the histories of the church has been dealing with this holiness of God or the closeness of God. You know, the deists that started this country kind of had God out there. He was distinct and alien. But a lot of what they wrote and a lot of the hymns that were written really elevate God as this magnificent being so far out there. And then they ask the question, how could he be a part of us because he's so far out there? Well, we've got him, you know, hanging out at the coffee shop with us. No big deal. Just another one of the boys, just another one of the gals. The closeness of the Lord, albeit a treasured thing, can at times prohibit us from seeing him in his sacredness, his otherness, his holiness. And so the balance in our personal spiritual lives, and certainly as it's ebbed and flowed in church history, might be worth noting around this term. I'm just going to use the ongoing definition of set apart or distinct, but I'm going to use a lot of synonyms that will support that. Our language is fraught with holy expressions. These are a few that I have picked up over the years from classes just like this, where I've asked individuals what they thought about how to use the word holy. On the left column, 4 rows up from the bottom, a person that Abby and I are related to uses the word holy snikes when important things happen. My boss, right before I came here, right below that, when anything important would happen, he'd say, holy cats. We might be sitting in a meeting, or just chatting rather, and he might have forgotten he had a 2 o'clock meeting and it's now 2:15. When the recognition would hit him, you'd see his face light up and he'd go, holy cats, meaning something important, something special has now just happened. I need to deal with it. You can write down your others and send them to me, and I will incorporate. I'll reduce the size of the fonts and get them in there, as I've had to do over the years. But like we saw when we studied the word sin and we looked at that concept of miss, think how many words have the prefix miss, same in expressions typically, from holy smokes to holy mackerel to holy day or holiday, a special day that we will incorporate in our calendar, a very common way to understand this. 1 Samuel 21 is where I want to start. Remember, in word studies, you want to try to find, the fancy phrase is non-theological usages, okay? All that means is God's not involved. It's not about God. It's just the way people talk. Because remember, God's goal in both the Old and New Testament was to use the language of the common man or woman and reveal and convey himself in that language. And biblical Hebrew was the common language of the day. In fact, I argue that certainly Semitic language, and most likely Hebrew, was the language spoke in the garden. The root or the word plays that Adam employs and Eve employs in Genesis 3 and 4 only work in Hebrew. I have gotten a man from the Lord, so I will name him Cain. Well, in Hebrew, the word gotten is Cain. I have Cained a man from the Lord, so I will name him Cain. The man named his wife Hava, for she was the Havaim of all the living, the living one. And so Eve got the name, in our language, Eve, but in Hebrew, Hava, around the idea of living. So it doesn't work because the words don't sound alike if they're not Semitic, let alone Hebrew. And in 1 Samuel 21 is some common stuff going on. This is David after he has been booted out of Saul's house, after he has made the deal with Jonathan. He's on the run. This is the beginning of what might be a 10-year escapade for David, running from Saul. And David, so he comes to Nob, and Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" And David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has commissioned me with a matter and has said to me," notice, the king has commissioned me to do this, and said to me, let no one know anything about the matter in which I am sending you and with which I have commissioned you. So this idea of commissioning is going to indicate some kind of, that he's on some sort of a special task. That would, the concept of commission would indicate. "And I have directed the young men to a certain place. Now therefore, what have you on hand?" So David is asking the priest, who keeps the holy place, the most holy place, which includes the table of showbread, bread to you and me, you got anything to eat? And hoping he's just got some regular rations that he could get from the priest. He's going to ask for 5 loaves or whatever can be found. And the priest will answer and say to David, "There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is the consecrated bread, the table of showbread, the holy bread, the kadosh bread." Notice the beautiful juxtaposition between, Roman meal, loaf from the HEB, and the special bread that was only be intended to be eaten by God, if you will, as the priest would consume that with God. So there's no ordinary bread, which he realized David was most likely asking for, but there is consecrated bread. And then he kind of gives a condition. If only the young men had kept themselves from women. He's assuming that they have not kept themselves from women. David's going to argue that they have, and is going to argue that I can in fact have the holy bread, for I am on a holy mission, and we have conducted ourselves with distinction. David answered the priest and said to him, "Surely women have been kept from us, as previously when I set out and the vessels of the young men were holy, though it is an ordinary journey." There's the juxtaposition word again. Just like the bread, you might consider his journey ordinary, although it's actually holy. How much more then today will their vessels be holy? And he actually argues and gets the consecrated bread. The point of the passage, obviously, is this kind of back and forth between this idea of ordinary and holy. There's no concept of maybe being kept from women made them away from sin, and the term can certainly refer to that. They've been commissioned by the king to do this job, and so they see it as special. But it's really not about their individual walks with God. It's not about sinning less. It's just about an attitude that this is special, and what we're doing is special, and we realize you have ordinary bread, but we think we deserve the special bread also, because we are in fact on a special mission. So the priest gave him the consecrated bread. And so for your purposes, just that back and forth between ordinary and holy are found here in the word consecrated. "For there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place when it was taken away." So they got to eat the food prepared for God in the middle of the tabernacle. Other examples of things that are made special or holy that don't really refer to morality, if you will, and how one conducts his or herself. "For 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar." So here's a bunch of rocks. Altar sounds so nice in our concept until you just see it. It's just a bunch of rocks that's been laid together. And you shall consecrate the altar. Now, the altar's not struggling with a sin problem. The altar doesn't have morality, yet in their mind, we can make it special. So the worship center or the sanctuary, because the church comes and gathers there on a Sunday, that's a special place. But if we're in there rehearsing some line for a video on Tuesday afternoon, it's really not all that special of a room. It's just another room. The air is not conditioned any differently in there. It was made out of the same structure as the rest of the building, but we kind of consider it special for the special thing that goes on for that hour and 15 minutes. Same with the altar. The constitution of the rocks doesn't change, but it's made special in our minds. Because why? This is the place where we can meet God and make kippur, or atonement. That idea of covering. Remember, sin was maybe best equated to a pothole. How do you deal a pothole? You cover it or you fill it. You deal with it. And that's the idea of atonement. 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. Then the altar shall be most holy. Same word, kadosh. And whatever touches the altar, notice it's almost transferable. Not literally, the molecules aren't any different. There's not anything that gets on you that's distinctly from an altar, but it's as if you've been made special because you went to the special place and you thought about special things. That's the idea behind holy, is to sort of render us out of the ordinary to that which is special, that which is consecrated. The Sabbath day in Genesis 2:3. In fact, I think one of the most unfortunate chapter breaks, as we talked about before, is the chapter break at 2:1 in Genesis 2. I think all 7 days should be incorporated. That would take you all the way to 2:3. But the reason editors made the chapter break is the high special place that the Jews and now Christianity have placed on the Sabbath day. And so the Sabbath day is referred to in 2:1 through 3, and the other 6 days are in 1 through 30, of chapter 1, verse 1 through 31. But there's a structural marker in 2:4 that really is the beginning of the next idea, which is that formation of Adam and Eve. But nonetheless, God blessed the Sabbath day, sanctified it, because in it he rested. There the word sanctified is the word kodesh. The keeping of the Sabbath in the Ten Commandments is the longest of all the commandments, by the way, and it's why certainly the Pharisees thought it to be the most important. He gave the most words to it. So you reach a point, think about it, at the time of Jesus where a donkey in a ditch had more rights than a human being on a Saturday, on the Sabbath. They couldn't heal a man on the Sabbath, but they could pull a donkey out of a ditch. That's how upside down things had gotten to keep this rule, to keep these days. If you go to the parts of Lower East Side in New York, certainly parts of Boston, elsewhere, but especially in the Old City in Jerusalem, you'll see wires all over the place, and those are called Sabbath day journey wires. And depending on where you live, you can't go beyond the wire that you've been assigned to, or it becomes work. Okay, and thus you violated the Sabbath. And so it was an important day, but it's just a special day because of that God did something out of the ordinary. He worked forming and filling for 6, then rested, or Sabbath. He's not tired. He enjoyed the accomplishment, did something different, enjoyed that specialness, and gave that pattern that you'll see. Here's where your minds will be blown, most likely, if you stay in keeping with everyone else who studied this with me. Same book, same author, Moses, who just wrote about the Sabbath day being sanctified and holy, used it many other places. This is Judah being bewitched by his daughter-in-law, Tamar, into thinking he is going to be with a prostitute. Now, the irony of this is Judah at this point, although the fourth born, is now the king of all those born of Jacob, Leah, Rachel, and everybody else that was in the game there back in Genesis 29 and 30. The first 3 have lost the right of inheritance. Ironically, the story of Joseph begins in 37, and he's starkly contrasted with the behavior of Judah in 38, who's looking for Canaanite prostitutes. So quickly has it unraveled that through Abram in Genesis 12, and the covenant established in 12, 15, and 17, and the 12 sons of Israel born in 29 and 30, through which the Lord Jesus Christ will come through the lineage of Judah. At that time in Genesis 38, the head guy is looking for Canaanites, prostitutes. Canaanites cursed in Genesis 9. Now he's not only looking for Canaanite women, but those that are prostitutes. And his daughter-in-law fakes him out as she pretends to be one of those. After he leaves, he sends back his manservant, because he had left a cord behind as a signal that I'll come back. And he, the manservant, comes back, and he asks the men of her place, saying, "Where is the temple prostitute who was by the road at Enaim?" And the answer was, "There's no temple prostitute here." So he returns to Judah, not the region, but the man, and said, "I did not find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said there has been no temple prostitute here." Kodesha, Kodesha, Kodesha. The special prostitute. Not the common one, the special prostitute. Amazingly, prostitution was connected to religious worship. Goes all the way into the New Testament. That's why the Corinthians are so problematic and so fleshly and so difficult. And the theory being that in order to enjoy the highest level of intimacy one might have with their God, with one's God, you united physically with one of their representatives, or called consorts. And it was available both for women and for men. So male consorts would be available for women. Female consorts would be available for men. I know I'm ruining your idea of holy here, which is part of my goal, by the way, because I think it becomes more precious when we see it in its full expression. And that uniting was the ultimate way to express one's adoration, love, union with that God. And so it's very common in Corinthians, is very common in Genesis 38. She had pretended to be not the common prostitute, the special prostitute that was connected with the temple. If your mind is racing, I'll go ahead and help you understand some things. Most of the behavior in this kind of prostitution was done fully clothed with a veil around the woman. He did not know he was with his daughter-in-law. He knew who his daughter-in-law was. He knew who Tamar was. But somehow her form and her face was, he was prevented from seeing those through this special garb that the temple prostitute would have worn during the bulk of their time together. So that's sort of how it works and how you can really understand how bad could Judah have been. Well, he did not know who it was because of the specialness of the woman that he thought he was with. Just a horrible way to act, and certainly no morality whatsoever. But notice that she's simply referred to not as the common prostitute, but the Kodesha, the special one, because she is connected to the worship of a god, Molech or Shemosh or Baal, some of the gods that would have existed, so-called gods that we see. So sorry about that, but it will help you have an understanding of the word, because a whole lot of sinning is going on here, and yet they're called holy, okay? So it doesn't mean sinless, it means to be distinct or special, uncommon. Elsewhere, if you're thinking, is that just the only time that shows up, man, and you found a weird section? Not at all. Deuteronomy, Kings several times, 2 Kings, Job, the idea of both the male and female version of Kodesh, in our case here, Kodesha, others would be Kodeshot, I guess, would be referencing that kind of individual who represented a god or goddess with whom you might have union in the ultimate expression of worship, okay? It sort of makes sense now why God comes along the scene and says, "You shall have no other gods before me," okay? He doesn't come in and say, you know, let me be on stage like what we're seeing now with, you know, debates and everybody running for president. There's 7 or 8 guys out there. He doesn't take the stage with the other gods of the day. Baal, the god of the sky, would have been highly revered because he brought rain or withheld rain. Sun, withheld sun. You have to have crops in an agrarian society. And you would make your appeasing of that god in a variety of ways, through sexual union, through child sacrifice, through the giving of libations or crops and things of that nature. And that's why things get so messed up. And he says, don't go to the high places, which they thought if the higher you went, the closer you were to God. He shows himself to be completely distinct. But this is the black backdrop onto which the 10 Commandments come, onto which even the ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ and Paul and Peter in the New Testament and it can become that debauched, if you will. Now, let's go take a nice shower and get clean here in Isaiah 6:3, because clearly the scene in the year, I love how it begins in 6:1, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the king. Okay, so the human king around Isaiah's time had died. Then in a vision, he's transported into the third heaven, or in a vision to see the things of the third heaven, and I saw the king. Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies. And his description was captured in this. So special, so distinct, so uncommon, so over the top, never seen that before kind of mindset was that vision. It impressed Isaiah so much that he could only come up with the term that best captured separateness and specialness and uncommonness, and repeats it to make the point. He's not talking about that God's a Trinity. He just, in Hebrew thought, if you say the same thing 3 times, it's full expression of it. Holy, 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 Kodesh, 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 is Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the armies. And he's called Lord of the armies. The word for host there, Sabah, is because all these angels are around him. And it's just overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And notice we'll start to pick up some words that we're already familiar with. The whole earth is full of his importance. It makes sense. Glory is an nice little Christian lingo word that doesn't really have any meaning until you strip it down to, no, it means that God is so big. And that scene I just saw is so immense and uncommon that his importance touches everything. That's the most important being there is. And I will react and rearrange in accord with his specialness and with his importance. If you know the story, Isaiah says it's not good actually for me to be here. I should leave. Like you've walked into a wedding that's top hat and white gloves, and you're in a tank top and cutoffs. You know, you just walked in there and, sorry, I shouldn't be here. This is not the right place for me. That's how Isaiah felt. In the vision, his sin is addressed, and he's then able to say, Lord, send me later. But beautiful idea here in this term, holy. You'll see in Luke 5, I love Peter in the boat with Jesus. All the fish come in, that it actually becomes dangerous. There are more than one boat, so it's great study in Luke 5, just for Bible study methods, basic observation. How many boats were there? The nets began to break. What they don't record is the sound that fish make, and they're just flopping and making all kind of noises. They pulled it in and strained. And in the middle of that, Peter's best day at work, he lets go of the net, goes to the back of the boat where Jesus is sitting and watching, falls down before him and says, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. In the presence of special uncommonness, his rank commonality was revealed to the point where, no, this isn't right. Notice, depart from me. I know the guy that just caused all these fish, but I shouldn't be in his presence. I'm in a tank top and cutoffs, and I'm in the presence of whitetail, top hat and whitetail. Depart from me. Revelation 4, everybody, I call it the fall down ministry. Every time you see the elders in heaven, they're falling down before the Lord. That way of physically depicting, it's not right that I stand when you stand. You know, I need to hit the deck to show the difference because you're so special. 1 Peter 1, now as we get to more familiar territory where certainly we should be distinct and set apart and special from this foe called sin. As Peter quotes from Leviticus, kind of a whole book about sacrificing for sin, he says, for I am Yahweh your God, holyize yourself, consecrate yourself, and therefore be holy. Same word, hagios, same word, be holy, for I am holy. You be holy, for I am holy. You be special in all of your thoughts, all of your identity, all of your perspective, not just your actions. In fact, I think that limits it, but certainly with your actions, because our actions should be a part of an integrity of identity and who we are. And that becomes the essence of the Christian life, is being conformed to the image of Christ and his identity and his character. So you be holy because he is holy. 5th grader can get it, 63-year-old can get it. Why? I'm God who brought you out of the house of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. That's one of the job descriptions of the Christian who wants to be properly related to God, is to recognize his specialness and adjust ourselves in accord with his specialness, his set-apartness. The word saints all through the New Testament is not how, as some high church has meant it. It's not a venerated, sinless person. It's just a special person. We're special. To the saints at Corinth, he will write. To the saints in Galatia. To the saints in Thessalonica. To the saints in Rome. To the holy ones, the special ones, we're set apart, distinct because of our relationship with Christ. Then we'll see other words, grace, peace be yours, things of that nature. So the idea to be sanctified, sanctification, seminary talk for to be special, to make yourself special to be like him, to be in that process of becoming set apart or distinct or special. It can be easily remembered and taught with the special days that we have in our calendar system, a series of holidays or holy days. We celebrate Halloween, All Hallows Eve. The word hallow in that language means to be holy. We use the word hallow, we never think about it. Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. The idea of hallow being special. Your name is distinct and holy, from Matthew 6. Same concepts, to be special, to be distinct, to recognize it. And that's that idea of distinction or set-apartness and uncommonality, specialness, apartness, sacredness, that to be consecrated, to be wholly other, to see yourselves as in this process of being transformed completely, and not as the Pharisee, just settle for sinning less and letting others know how you're doing along the way, okay? If this is true, that we are to be holy like he is holy, no one can claim achievement. Conversely, all should say, still got work to do, still on that path. We actually will not, it will not be achieved this side of death or rapture, because as Matthew 11 says, as we've talked before, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven on earth, John the Baptist, would be dwarfed by the least of those in the kingdom of heaven, okay? Because why? They possess now the inability to sin. John the Baptist still had to deal with his flesh and his propensity for selfishness and me-centeredness. To not even be able to sin still is that burden that we carry and will be jettisoned at death or rapture. Thus in Philippians 2, Paul actually looks forward to his death, doesn't even consider it that big a deal. In fact, he says, okay, I'll stay, but because of you, but it's far better that I go. That's a little different look at the idea of death. And the enormity of the change from the sinful man or woman, now believer, and as they're made sanctified, holyized, to actually being like Christ. It always involves our efforts. It always involves our presence, our involvement, to be that one who is set apart or distinct. A lot of other places to study. They should be on your notes there. Even the one in Deuteronomy 22 talks about a field that is holy, and you can study that one on your own. But lots of common usages in both Testaments for this word. Holy is a great term, can help you understand the word, but should also be carefully watched over to understand that it doesn't just mean to sin less. It means to see yourself as distinct and special. Let's see here.